Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links video. Today we're going over the brand new box, Blazing Chemicalization, as well as some of the other cards that we have got alongside it. And I suppose what better place to start than some of the drops from the new character, Maddox, and his event. So the first card we're going to take a look at is Chromatographica. So not really much to say about this. 2500 attack, 1600 defense, level 7 vanilla monster. So we can summon this using Secret Order, which is quite nice. And we are going to get a skill that does also work alongside this card, which is pretty cool as well. In the future, this card will also get several fusions. So this card is definitely worth picking up because I think it will see a little bit of play now, but it will definitely see a bit of play in the future. Next up, we have one of our first equipped spell cards, Chemicalizer Red. We can equip this card to a face-up pyro type monster on the field. The equipped monster gains 300 attack and cannot be destroyed by your opponent's trap card effects. Now, 300 attack is not a lot, and being protected from trap cards isn't super relevant right now. Realistically, Widespread Ruin is the only card seeing play that even would affect this, and most people are playing Negate Attack, so it's not really going to be that great, unfortunately. The only other new card we got was Nitro Hound, which is okay. 400 attack, 400 defense, fire pyro. During the turn that you normal summon this card, inflict 400 damage to your opponent. Okay, 400 burn. You can only attack with pyro monsters this turn, so it does lock us into pyro, but the idea is we'd summon this out, burn our opponent, and then tribute it away, and then we've just got some free damage. It's not great, but if we had enough of these small burn effects, they do all add up, and it could be quite relevant. Right now, though, I'd say Nitro Hound, not spectacular. So next up, I want to show off the new bundles that are coming out with the new box, and the first one is the Flame Ruler set. So Flame Ruler is an interesting card, 1500 attack, 1600 defense, fire pyro. This face-up card can be treated as 2 tributes to the tribute summon of a fire attribute monster in attack position. So nothing too crazy, it just helps us get out our boss monsters a little bit easier, but that in itself is actually pretty good. Now, I don't think I would play this over any legend ordinarily, but if a skill locks us into fire or locks us into pyro, sure, Flame Ruler, pretty good addition. And the other one is the Grand Extreme set. This card is a very interesting card. This card was limited for a time in the OCG, so it was quite powerful. But we can special summon 1 fish or sea serpent type monster from your hand, face up to your field, then shuffle up to 5 monsters from your opponent's graveyard into their deck. So right now, the graveyard hate effect is not super prevalent. There will be some situations like Psychic kind of want to set up their graveyard. We also have decks like Metarian kind of want to set up their graveyard. We're going to have decks like Machines that like to have a lot of machines in the graveyard. So this will have some use, but not widespread use realistically. This also only summons from hand, which can make it a little bit restrictive, and it only works on Fish and Sea Serpent, but is still pretty good. Effectively, we get a discount on a boss monster, which is really quite nice. Now, the big elephant in the room is this card is limit 1, which is a little bit annoying. So we're only getting 1 copy of this card anyway, so this is here just to say you can't play other limit 1s in this deck, which is a little bit annoying. Basically, you can't play like Rice Terror Secure is going to be the primary one, which does kind of suck, but at the same time, I don't think it matters that much right now. I think this is probably limit 1 for future proofing, and we'll have to see what ends up happening with that. Now for the box itself, Blazing Chemicalization, and this box is pretty cool. So this box is coming out February 28th, or this Friday, and it's got some very interesting cards in it. The first of which is going to be Elemental Hero Burst Wingman. This card is very strong. So it's made using Avian and Burstinatrix. It must be fusion summoned. It has the same stats as Flame Wingman, which is 2100 attack, 1200 defense. We can send the top card of it to the graveyard, and then 1 face-up warrior type monster on your field gains 1000 attack until the end of your opponent's next turn. So you can use it on itself and it becomes a 3100 attack monster, which is pretty good. And that boost lasts until the end of our opponent's turn, which means this will be a 3100 attack monster throughout your opponent's turn, which is pretty good. But don't forget, we can give this to any warrior monster, so if we have a bigger warrior monster, for example, we could stack boosts on that. And if we get out 2 Burst Wingmans in a single turn, we can stack those boosts. But then we can destroy a spell trap on your opponent's field, and this is a very strong effect, just be able to freely pop a back row. This means if we play this in the hero deck, and we have Avian Spell Tactics, we will effectively have 6 ways to pop back row, which is a lot. And it does mean that our attacks should be connecting quite frequently. This card is really strong, and as you can see by the fact this is a Japanese image, this card is quite modern support for the Elemental Hero deck over in the CG, and this card has done quite well over there. Now, we don't have all the same cards to kind of support this that we do in the OCG, but I still think this card individually is very, very powerful, and I think this card will be worth picking up if you really like the hero strategy. Next up, we have Vanishing Heliacal Riser, and this is another reasonably okay card. Level 7, 2400 attack, 1500 defense, and that 1500 defense is very important because of the skill we're looking at in a minute. If you have 2 or less cards in your hand, shuffle 1 monster from your graveyard into the deck. Okay, we have to have 2 or less cards in our hand, we have to have a monster in our graveyard, we get shuffled back. We don't discard a card though, and that's pretty good. This card gains 200 attack until the end of this turn. Okay, so 26, that's fine. Then if there is a face-up spell card on the field, you can draw 1 card. So if we have a equip spell typically, we're going to get a draw off of this effect. Now that's pretty cool, but we do have some leaks that have shown us our skills, such as Galactica Rising. So can be activated during a turn that you normal summon a level 4 monster. If your constructed deck contains at most 1 equipped spell card and all of the monsters are light galaxy type monsters, send either 1 normal monster or 1 Galacterial or Galacterial Zyphos from your deck to the graveyard, and if you normal summon a monster with 1500 or 2500 defense this turn, add it to your hand instead, and monsters with 1500 defense inflict piercing damage. Now notably, our new boss monster here does have that 1500 defense, so we get an equipped spell onto the field, we get a free draw from this. If we summoned Heliacal Riser this turn, it will then also turn on our skill to, instead of milling a card, we get to add a card to our hand, and we'll get the draw from it, which is just a +2, which is really, really nice. So Heliacal Riser has some potential. The skill does give it piercing. We do have a lot of ways to plus with this skill, and with Vanishing Heliacal Riser's effect as well. So there is some potential here. I don't know if this is going to be super duper good, but I do think there is definitely some potential for this to actually be pretty decent. So the next card we're going to talk about is Cyber Rush Dragon, and this card has the exact same stats and requirements as a Cyber Twin Dragon, but if your opponent has a monster on the field, we can draw cards until we have 5 in our hand, and then send 4 cards from our hand to the graveyard, so we get 1 new card effectively. Then you can special summon a machine type monster from your hand face up to your field. Now historically, the card you would summon of this is Mirror Innovator, but we can't really use Innovator because it's limit 3 and Cyber Dragon's limit 3, and the Cyber Dragon skill does stop us from using Innovator. So there's not going to be much to actually special summon off of this. We can't special summon Ancient Gear Golem because its effect will prevent it. So all we're really going to be able to get out of this is like a 2400 Guy, which is not super useful. So I think the actual good use for this card is going to be digging for a trap card, because we will get to effectively draw until we have 5 cards, then send 4 cards to the graveyard. We could just leave a trap in hand and set it onto the field. So I think if we find ourselves in a position where we might just die on the following turn, we can use this, search for a slime or a negate attack, set it on the field, and then pass over, and that might be enough to keep us in the game and potentially win later on. So that, in my opinion, is going to be the best way to use this card. And finally, we have the base card of the box, Chemicalized Salamander, 2500 attack, 1500 defense. Again, 1500 defense, very relevant because of a skill we'll be talking about in a minute. We can shuffle 3 Pyro-type monsters from your graveyard into the deck. All face-up monsters on your opponent's field lose attack equal to the number of monsters in your opponent's graveyard times 100. So this card is fine. It lets us recycle cards. It can reduce the attack of all of your opponent's monsters, but it's going to be quite weak early game and a bit stronger late game. But realistically, it's not really a powerhouse card. In the current meta, where we have Dragon Fusion and Psychic Fusion running around, this card is just too weak to realistically compete. So I'm not expecting much out of this card, but I do hope it does well. My initial thought is it's not going to do too well. And the reason why is because the skills we have don't really support it that well. So the first one is going to be the Fatal Roar. It can be activated from turn 2 onward during a turn that you've normal or special summoned a normal monster face up. If all of the monsters in your constructed deck are Pyro type and all the effect monsters have 100 or more defense. So quite weird restrictions, but basically we summon a normal monster, deck has to be nothing but Pyros, and all of the effect monsters in our deck need to have 100 or more defense, which basically means we can't play the noodles. Send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. Okay, that's fine. We need cards in our graveyard anyway, because we're going to, for example, want to use our Chemicalized Salamander's effect, which is going to need to shuffle cards back. And also, if we are able to get Chromatographicus into the graveyard, we can bring it back with something like Secret Order. So far, so good. If we do not have a face-up level 7 or higher effect monster on the field, so if we have our Chromatographicus, we can still use this. You can also add a level 7 or lower monster with 1500 or more defense from your graveyard to your hand. So we can grab back the Chemicalized Salamander, or we can grab back the Chromatographicus, or any other monster that have 1500 defense, and we will be going over a few of them in a minute. In my opinion, this is the better skill, but it's still not great. Basically, we have easy access to boss monsters, but we still don't have Pierce, we still don't have any way to get damage in through set 3 pass, which I think is going to be the deck's major weakness. The other skill we do have is Red Protection, and this one is okay. I don't think Red Protection is anywhere near as good, but it's still okay. So the next cards we're going to talk about are the SRs, and the first one is going to be Clashing Twin Tides. This is, again, a very modern card, so it's quite surprising we have it. Reveal one level 7 or higher fish or sea serpent type monster from your hand to your opponent and shuffle it into the deck. Draw 2 cards. So this has to be level 7 or higher, which is kind of the negative. Other than that, this is a really good consistency tool. We basically lose 2 cards from our hand and we get 2 new cards. So we get to cycle through our deck, which can be really, really good if we need to find specific pieces. So overall, just a really strong card, and I hope we do see more effects like this in the future. Things like trade-in, things like Ship of 7 Treasures, all of those kind of discard, draw 2 type of effects. Then we have Rising Hero Manicanita. This card is fine. 900 attack, 1000 defense is okay. Place 1 card from your hand on the bottom of your deck. Add 1 Rising Hero Argent or 1 Rising Hero Tantalum from your graveyard to your hand. Now, if we're playing Tantalum, this card is okay. So we can get back Argent, we can get back Tantalum, which gives us different options. We can get back the boss, can be really, really good. If we're not playing Tantalum, I think I would rather just play Shitotsu, because Shitotsu has 100 more attack. It can also bring back Avian as well as the Argent, rather than just being locked into just Argent, for example, if we weren't playing the Tantalum. And it can special summon that monster to the field, which means it comes out in defense position, whereas this would add the Argent to our hand. We'd then have to summon it. We'd have both monsters stuck in attack position. We could only get rid of one with the skill, so we'd be stuck with the other. So I do think this card is actually quite weak. Next up, we have Monster Calling, and this is a Gaia the Fierce Knight support card, which is pretty cool. Send 1 monster from your hand to the graveyard to draw a card. Okay, so we're -1ing at the moment. Then we can special summon a non-effect monster with 2000 attack or 2100 defense from a graveyard face up to your field. And notably, this is supposed to be used with Curse of Dragon and Gaia the Fierce Knight, but Dark Magician also just so happens to have 2100 defense. There might be something there. Now, on their own, they're not going to be doing much. Dark Magician on its own also doesn't do very much, but when we get to some of the other leaks in a little bit, this card will make a bit more sense. But so far, this card is already pretty good. Then we have Galacterial Aura, and this was the card that was mentioned in our new Galaxy skill. If we have 3 or more Galaxy-type monsters in your graveyard during the main phase, this card was normal or special summoned, we can add Galacteria Xiphos from your graveyard to your hand. We will just go ahead and show you that card as well. Galacteria Xiphos is a new equip spell that can only be equipped to a Galaxy-type monster and only if your opponent has a level 7 or 8 monster on their field, which is very restrictive. A lot of the time, your opponent will just have face-down monsters or only low levels, or they'll have fusions or maximums, and we won't be able to equip this card whatsoever, which does kind of suck. But the equipped monster gains attack equal to the number of face-up normal monsters on your field times 300, so this caps out at 900, and if it is equipped to Galactica Oblivion, it gains 1000 more attack. On a Galactica Oblivion, this will cap out at 19, which is not bad. That means Galactica Oblivion will go up to 44, which is a very respectable number. But it's nothing like super insane. I do think this card is okay. Obviously, that's why it's limit 3, but it doesn't really blow me away. I don't think this card is absolutely insane. I think you'd still need like Meteor Charge to make this work. So I'm not sure how much play this card is going to see. We will have to wait and see. Next up, we have Ember the Hyper Assistant. This is a pretty cool card. If your opponent has a monster on the field, send this face-up card from your field to the graveyard to special summon a level 7 or higher Pyro-type monster from your hand to your field. This is another way to basically get out your big Pyro monsters a little bit easier, which is quite nice. Then if we have Super Assistant Ember, which this hasn't been changed yet, in your graveyard, the monster special summoned by this effect gains 800 attack until the end of this turn. Now, the big interesting thing for me is this is an 800 attack, 1500 defense monster. Because it has 1500 defense, that means we can put it back into our hand using our skill, which is actually pretty good. So basically what we're saying here is that we have a lot of ways to get our guys out. We can get our guys big, we can weaken our opponent's monsters, but none of that is super impressive. We still don't have piercing. We still don't have ways to reduce our opponent's monsters by a lot. We still don't have ways to boost our attack by a lot. So at the moment, Pyro's still looking a little bit weak. Then we have Jointech Raptor, and during the turn that you normal summon this card, send the top 2 cards of each player's deck to the graveyard, and inflict damage to your opponent equal to the number of monsters sent to the graveyard by this effect times 100. Then if you have a face-up equipped spell on your field, and inflicted damage to your opponent by this effect, you can change 1 attack position monster on your opponent's field to face-up defense position. But this card's okay, milling is okay, the burn doesn't really matter, and being able to change an attack mode monster to defense is okay. All things looking pretty good for this. But this card does also have a skill, and that is called Jointech Press Rush. So this skill is a little bit odd to me, but let's go through it. So it can be activated from turn 2 onward during a turn that you have normal summoned a level 7 monster or Jointech Raptor. If all of the monsters in your constructor deck are machine type monsters, and all the level 5 or higher monsters are earth attribute monsters with 2500 or 2300 attack, so a bit of a weird restriction there. But we can add a Jointech Rushhorn from your deck or your graveyard to your hand, then you can make one face-up Jointech Raptor on your field, gain 500 attack. So Jointech Rushhorn is a new super rare card that we're getting. This is equipped to a face-up machine type monster on your field, gains 300 attack and piercing. So it's a bit weird how this works out. I'm not really sure why we want to boost the attack of Jointech Raptor up to 1300. We could give it the equip spell and it goes to 1600 with piercing, but even that is not really a huge number. This is like an okay card, but I don't really understand what the skill wants us to do with it. Basically, the skill gives us easy access to the equip spell, which is fine. We can get it back from the deck or graveyard, so we only have to run the one copy. But other than that, there's not really much going on. Now, to be fair, having infinite access to the equip spell does mean we always have access to piercing, which is quite nice. We could give this to, let's say, Jointech Rex, get it up to 28, give it piercing, and then it can die and then go back to the graveyard. But then as long as we get out another boss or we get Raptor out again, we can keep getting it back again and again and again, which is actually pretty good. But outside of that, there's not really much else going on, and basically just having infinite access to Jointech Rushhorn is not a super interesting skill, but it could still be a good one. Next up, we have Tapantula, and this is an interesting card. 1300 attack is okay. So requirement, you normal summon this card this turn, and your opponent has 2 or more spell traps on their field. Add a level 4 machine type normal monster from your graveyard to your hand. So your opponent has to have 2 or more spell traps, which we don't really get to control. And we can only get back exactly a level 4 machine type normal monster. This card is potentially good when it's live. When it's not live though, this card is completely useless, and I don't know how often this is going to be live, so I'm not super interested in it personally. I think there's going to be too many situations that come up where you just can't use this card, and it's just a waste. So I probably wouldn't play it, and I'm not particularly impressed by it. And then the last new SR we got is the Sea Dragon King Granganus, and this card is interesting because it's limit 3. So 2500 attack, 1800 defense, respectable stats. During the turn that you normal summon this card, it has to be normal summoned. Inflict damage to your opponent equal to the number of spell traps on your opponent's field times 300, so that's going to cap out at 900. So it just burns your opponent for 900 sometimes. And that's okay, but we don't even get the effect if we summon it with Grand Extreme because the special summons, and this guy has to be normal summoned to get this effect off. So it's a little bit awkward. I don't really understand why this card is limit 3. My current theory is that they don't want you to play like a weird burn deck with this and Extra Spice the Elite Noodle Ninja. Other than that, I really have no idea. It's not a great card, but again, there are some other cards that do work with it. Now, onto the super rares. We've already talked about Rushhorn. Next up, we have Ember, the Super Assistant. So this is a card that was referenced by the other Ember up here, the Ember the Hyper Assistant. But this card is just a 0 attack, 1500 defense. Now, notably, 1500 defense means we can get it back with our skill, which is quite nice. That also means that Pyro now have 2 1500 defenders, which is interesting. This card will also be fusion material moving forward. It'll have a couple of different fusions, so this is definitely be a card to pick up. Next up, we have Germalu. This is just a 1500 vanilla. It's nice that we have a 1500 vanilla for Pyro now. It's pretty cool. Then we have Stream of Elimination. This is just back row hate for Sea Serpents. Then we have Head Bad Cachalot, and this is our other Sea Serpent boss. So we can send the top card of our deck to the graveyard. One face-up monster on your opponent's field loses 500 attack. Okay, it's not a super impressive effect, but at least it does something, right? We can summon this guy out, he can weaken our opponent's guys, we can attack over them. If it's a 3000 guy, we can crash. That is at least something. With the skill that we're getting for Sea Serpents as well, it will get us Umi, so we could effectively boost ourselves by 200 and attack over some monsters. So it can actually be pretty good. And then if we have Umi or Big Umi face up on the field, inflict 500 damage, getting an extra burn can be quite nice. There's also this little weird Sea Serpent burn sub-strategy coming in as well, which is interesting. But notably, again, we don't have any good way to get damage in through set 3 pass other than these very small amounts of burn, which makes me think the Sea Serpents might not be great. But one card that is really good for Sea Serpents is Sea Dragon Kleindros. So if your opponent has a monster on their field, place a Sea Dragon Granganus or a Grand Extreme from your graveyard on the bottom of your deck. Now, one of these is we only have 1 copy of, and it's limit 1, so this is a maximum of 4 copies of these cards that we put back into our deck. Special summon 1 fish or Sea Serpent monster from your hand face up to your field. This turn you can only attack with water monsters. So this is pretty cool, because we can just get out a Cachalot, or we can get out a Granganus from our hand, which is pretty good, especially since we have to shuffle a card from our graveyard back into our deck to do so, which means we're getting out completely for free. We don't use anything at all to summon this card, whereas if we use Grand Extreme, we lose the Grand Extreme spell card itself. This is just completely free. We get to keep the body that summons it, which is the Klindros, and we also get the body that is summoned, which is really good. Then there's Light Dolphin. This card's a bit awkward, but does give us a plus, which is really good. If we have Umi or Big Umi and a face-up Fish, Sea Serpent, Thunder, or Aqua type normal monster, then we do have to have the Umi, which again, the skill will get us to, so that's something. And then we have to have a normal Fish, Sea Serpent, Thunder, or Aqua monster. That's a little bit annoying. We can draw one card. And drawing a card is still really good, so we can just summon this out, ideally get a draw off it, and then tribute it off, get out your other big boss monsters, and we're good to go. So this potentially could be really, really good for the Sea Serpent deck. And then we have our last rare, and Magma Bear, and this card is actually pretty good. So this is an Earth Pyro, which means some of the skills lock us into fire monsters, so we won't be able to use this in those decks. We have to be careful which ones we use with it. But if we have no other monsters on your field, place a Pyro-type normal monster from your graveyard to the bottom of your deck, add a Pyro-type normal monster from your graveyard to your hand. So if we're playing a decent amount of Pyro-type normal monsters, which we probably will be, especially because we're going to have multiple copies of Ember, we can use this to basically get more bodies into our hand, which we can use to tribute summon. This can be pretty good, which basically does, again, re-emphasize the fact that the Pyro deck is going to be really, really good at just getting big bodies onto the board, but then not really do anything with them once they're there. But this is still a welcome tool deck. And finally, we have our N rarity cards, and we're just going to fly through these because they're not particularly impressive. We have a 1400 vanilla Flame Seeker. We have a new equipped spell, Equipment of Ascension. This card has some potential. We can equip it to a monster on our field, increase the level by 2 and attack and defense by 200. The attack and defense boost isn't huge, but increasing levels can be really good because if we get above like level 8, for example, suddenly we become immune to a lot of cards, so there is some potential there. We have Blast Examiner, which is a level 5 monster and completely terrible. We then have Dr. Redrobe, a second 1500 vanilla for the Pyro deck, which is very welcome. Then we have a 1500 and 1200 defense. That's very, very important. This is Gazelle, the King of Mythical Beast stats, on a Sea Serpent in Takra Minos, which is pretty cool. We then have one of the coolest looking cards in the game, Su Volcano. Thumbs up. Then we have Big Umi, which is pretty cool. Activate this card if we have 3 face-up water attribute monsters in the field. While it's face-up in the field zone, non-water monsters lose 300 attack and defense. The most annoying part of this card is actually activating it, because we have to have 3 face-up waters, which is something we don't typically want to do. Then we have Arrow Magma Bear. This card is not good. Send up to 2 cards from your hand to the graveyard, gain life points equal to the number of cards sent times 300. Realistically, this is just always going to be bad. Then there is Magmassage, which has a similar theme of sending cards from your hand to the graveyard, which is never a really good thing. There's also a level 7 monster with only 2100 attack. One face-up level 4 or lower monster on either side of the field gains attack equal to the number of cards sent to the graveyard, times 500. Not realistically going to be that great. And then finally, we got Umi, the field spell, which is quite good because we will need this for our water skill. And finally, we have our leaked card. There is quite a lot to go over here. So first things first, you will probably notice there is a lot of Gaia stuff here, which is very, very exciting. We'll be going through all of that time. So first up, Magmax Mantle Vader, 2400 attack. Send a Pyro-type monster from your hand to the graveyard. Destroy all face-up defense position monsters on the field with the same level as the monster sent to the graveyard to meet the requirement. But this card's really bad, because first off, your opponent has to have face-up defense position. That's quite rare in itself. Then the card we discard has to be the same level as the cards that are in face-up defense position on the opponent's field. So if the stars align, your opponent has 3 face-up defense position monsters that are all the exact same level, potentially we could wipe the board. That's not really going to happen, so this card's just kind of bad. Then we have Analyze Phlogiston. This is another quite bad card. It has a reasonable defense at 23, its attack is again 23, which is not very good attack for a level 7 monster. We can send 1 spell trap from our hand to the graveyard. Already we don't really want to be discarding spell traps. Shuffle 3 Pyro monsters from your graveyard into the deck whose total levels equal to the total levels of attack position, level 8 or lower monsters on the opponent's field. That is almost never going to happen. Realistically, your opponent has to have a bunch of level 8 or lower monsters. They have to be face up in the field. Our graveyard has to pretty much exactly match what they have, and then we can use this effect to destroy all attack position level 8 or lower monsters on the opponent's field. This is almost, again, never going to happen, but when it does, potentially you could wipe the field. This turn you can only attack with 1 monster, and don't forget it's only level 8 or lower, which means your opponent's big fusion monsters and the big maximum monsters won't be destroyed by this. Then we have the Polymerization Legend spell, and we knew we were getting this because we did see this in the Gaia skill leak, so this is pretty cool. Polymerization again gains a lot of value by fusing from the hand. So if we have two high-level monsters that we want to fuse together, that's where polymerization really gets the extra value, because basically all of that tribute material is saved, so you gain that as value. So this card isn't super fantastic, but is pretty good. Then we have battle-tested Gaia the Fierce Knight, and we did predict we might get this card, and it looks like we were right. So you can tribute summon this card in attack position by tributing one face-up level 5 or higher monster. Send the top card of your deck to the graveyard. This card's name becomes Gaia the Fierce Knight this turn. Then you can fusion summon by shuffling this card from your field and one monster from your graveyard into the owner's deck as materials. So this is actually really, really good. The idea is we want to get a Cursor Dragon onto the field, and we tribute it to summon out this, use its own effect, and then bam, we go into fusion monster. Now this is especially good because we did get our super rare spell card, Monster Calling. So send a monster from your hand to the graveyard, draw a card, special summon a monster from the graveyard, specifically a Cursor Dragon. So we lose this, we lose a card from our hand, then we get to draw a card and summon Cursor Dragon. So we break even on this card already. Then we contribute that Cursor Dragon to get out battle-tested Gaia. We've lost the Cursor Dragon, but we've replaced it with this, so we're now -1 effectively. Then we can use battle-tested Gaia the Fierce Knight's effect to immediately fuse into one of our fusions, and that means we have spent 1 card total to go into one of our fusions. We still have effectively the fusion and 3 other cards to work with, which is absolutely fantastic, especially considering the fusion monsters we've got. First, we'll talk about Swift Gaia the Dragon Champion. This can be made with any warrior monster that's 2100 defense, which means any of the Gaias, and specifically Cursor Dragon. Send the top card of the deck to the graveyard, gains piercing. Very, very good. Then, if we have no cards in our hand, we can draw a card. A card that gets piercing and pluses is really, really good. So if we can get our hand empty, getting that free plus is really, really good. Piercing is always going to be super valuable. And the other boss monster is Gaia, Conqueror of Champions, and I actually do really like this translation. This is a magical knight made using Gaia and Cursor Dragon. During the main phase, this card was special summoned. Shuffle a non-magical knight monster from your graveyard into the deck. So this is the big drawback, is this is only the main phase that it was summoned, so we don't get to use this every single turn if it survives. But multi-choice effect, this turn this card can attack directly, or destroy 1 spell trap on the opponent's field. So very, very powerful card, and we do already know this card is going to come out at limit 1. Very, very good, and this actually looks like Gaia might be a really, really powerful deck when we do get a hold of these cards. But we do not yet 100% know how we're getting access to these Gaia cards. There is some sort of event happening on the 28th, and we're expecting to get them from that, but we'll have to wait and see. Next up, we have Red Riser. During the turn you normal summon this card, add Chemicalizer Red from your graveyard to your hand, Chemicalizer Red being our equip spell. It's not super great. There is a skill that does work with this, but I don't think the skill is super duper good. Then we have Scales of Flame, again works with the same skill. This card can be searched out from our deck once using that skill. Not super impressive, but we can shuffle a Pyro monster from your graveyard into the deck. 1 face-up Pyro monster on your field gains 500 attack to the end of this turn. Then you can make 1 face-up monster from your opponent's field, lose 500 attack to the end of this turn. This effect is okay, it's not bad, but it's not super great either. Not super enthused about this card, let's say that. Then an interesting card, Bleach Mortar. I believe this is going to be a ranked reward, but 1 face at level 7 or higher monster on your opponent's field loses 500 attack to the end of this turn, and then inflict 500 damage. So potentially some stuff you can do with a burn deck there. But more importantly, this card does work with our new boss monster, Clean Beret Colonel Mop. So if your opponent has a face at level 7 or higher monster on the field, place Bleach Mortar from your graveyard on top of your deck. So it's okay. Realistically, Colonel Mop is really bad. The reason this card did see play originally, specifically Bleach Mortar, is because we have a card called Wash Sprayer the Clean Skateer, who is nowhere to be seen, but that lets you shuffle Bleach Mortar from your graveyard back into your deck and draw a card. When we get that card, maybe Bleach Mortar will be a bit better, but Colonel Mop is really bad. So that is it. That is all of the cards, and that did take a while. But my closing thoughts from this box and the reveals that we've had, all the different leaks, the Gaia stuff looks like it's probably going to be the best, but we don't really have enough information about it to really know exactly how many of each card we're going to get. We'll have to wait and see what happens on Friday. Beyond that, I actually think the hero deck has come out looking pretty good. Burst Wingman is really, really strong, and I think this has a lot of potential. Then it's got to be the Cyber Dragon deck. This deck is already really strong as is. Cyber Rush is like an okay inclusion. I actually think Jointech Rushhorn is the really big card that deck's going to get. I think, again, if you go Cyber Twin, give it 300 attack and piercing, it's going to be really, really powerful. You might just be able to close games out of nowhere. Then I would say the Light Galaxy stuff and the Vanishing Heliacal Riser deck seems to be the next strongest in my opinion. I think just having piercing and having lots of ways to plus does give this deck quite a lot. And then I would say Pyro and Sea Serpents are kind of tied. Both of them look like they're going to struggle to really get through set 3 pass. I don't think they're really going to be able to hold their own in this meta whatsoever. I do think, however, none of these decks are really going to compete with dragons and psychics. I would love to be wrong, but those decks do just seem so oppressive and so powerful. I don't think any of these decks are really going to reach those lengths, but I really hope they do. A big issue is a lot of these decks really want to play like a slow grind game. They're not really going to OTK your opponent out of nowhere. And because of that, you have to put some guys on the board, get some damage in, and then you invite your opponent to OTK you on the crackback. We don't really have the defensive traps necessary to survive that, which does create some issues. But I'm still excited for this box. I'm really looking forward to playing some of these cards, and I'm really looking forward to the GRF that's coming up, and hopefully playing one of these decks. So, thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you next time.